Welcome to this explainer. Okay, I want you to literally picture this. The year is 1974. World War II has been over for exactly 29 years. The world has entirely moved on to an era of peace, rebuilding, prosperity. But deep in the incredibly dense, haunting jungles of Lubang Island in the Philippines, there's a phantom soldier who is still fighting his war. It's a mystery that just completely defies human logic. A soldier for whom time basically stopped in 1944. Think about the contrast here. Back in 1945, the entire world celebrated peace. Nations were busy rebuilding, establishing new cities, and honestly, trying their best to forget old battlegrounds. Yet fast forward to 1974, and we find Hiro Onoda. He's a Japanese Imperial Army intelligence officer in a torn uniform, clutching a gleaming sword and a meticulously well-kept rifle, still patiently waiting for an American ambush. I mean, how does a human being survive, cut off from the world and from reality itself for 29 long years? The unbreakable vow, indoctrination, and the Nakano Military School. Now, you might be wondering, was he just crazy? No, Onoda's 29-year holdout wasn't madness. It was the direct result of intense psychological programming and hardcore guerrilla training. So the crucial point is this absolute chilling command he received from his commanding officer at the Nakano Military School. Looking Onoda dead in the eyes, his commander ordered, "You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. Whether it takes 3 years or 5 years, we will come back for you." And honestly, those exact words just locked his psychology into an endless war. His mission was brutally simple: disrupt and destroy. The entire strategy was to secretly attack enemy supply lines, avoid capture at literally all costs, and turn that jungle into an absolute hell for the enemy. Onoda's intelligence training was so deeply ingrained that he viewed everything, and I mean everything, on the island as cunning enemy propaganda. Even when Allied forces dropped millions of leaflets announcing Japan's surrender right after the bombing of Hiroshima in 1945, Onoda dismissed them entirely. To him, it was just a clever trap to flush him out. 29 years of survival, the ultimate test of endurance. Okay, let's dive into this and look at the sheer physical endurance this required. Cut off completely from civilization, zero supply lines, Onoda and his men survived like literal ghosts. For shelter, they slept on the damp ground beneath dense jungle canopies. For food, they scavenged raw bananas, coconuts, occasionally stealing rice from local farmers. And when they needed real, substantial sustenance, they actually hunted cows, sun-drying the meat so it would last them for months at a time. Over the decades, Onoda's isolation became incredibly absolute and honestly tragic. In 1949, his comrade Akatsu finally surrendered. 5 years later, in 1954, Shimada was killed in a shootout with a search party. And then, jumping to 1972, his last remaining companion, Kazuka, was killed. At that point, Onoda was entirely alone in the jungle. One man, fiercely fighting against a world that had long since moved on without him. But we have to acknowledge that his private war had a terrifying, very real cost. Over those 29 years, Onoda actually killed over 30 local people and injured more than 100 others. Because of his unyielding indoctrination, he genuinely believed these local farmers and police officers were actually disguised enemy combatants trying to sabotage his mission. In his mind, the war hadn't paused for a single second. And it's not like people weren't trying to stop him. The Philippine government and Onoda's own family in Japan tried absolutely everything to save him. Desperate search parties dropped current newspapers, personal letters, family photos right from the sky. They even went as far as broadcasting his own brother's voice over loudspeakers deep into the jungle canopy. But his programming, it was just completely impenetrable. He rejected every single piece of reality, utterly convinced they were all just elaborate enemy tricks. The final command: ending a war of the mind. Seriously, I want to ask you this. How do you end a war for a soldier who believes the truth itself is just propaganda? It was an impossible puzzle. We're talking about a situation that top-tier governments, diplomats, and entire military squads had completely failed to resolve for nearly 3 decades. Well, that impossible puzzle was surprisingly solved by a highly eccentric 24-year-old Japanese adventurer named Norio Suzuki. Suzuki had these 3 bizarre life goals. 1, see a wild panda. 2, find the mythical Yeti. And 3, find Hiro Onoda. So wandering into the thick Philippine jungle completely unarmed, this young guy achieved in just 4 days what entire armies couldn't. He found Onoda without firing a single shot. No way, right? Now here is where it gets absolutely fascinating. When Suzuki found him, Onoda flatly stated he would only surrender if his commanding officer ordered him to. This sent the Japanese government on a wild search for Major Taniguchi. And get this, the man who had been a terrifying Imperial Army commander back in 1944 was now, in 1974, just a quiet, peaceful civilian making his living selling books. So picture that incredibly surreal moment. Deep in the remote jungle, the quiet bookseller puts on his old military uniform, stands before this rugged 52-year-old soldier, and officially reads the final order. Japan has lost. Your mission is now over. Hand over your sword and rifle. And literally, the moment those precise words were spoken, a 29-year psychological spell was finally broken. Onoda stood at attention, handed over his weapons, and his war was officially over. Lost to time, a tragic aftermath. And this brilliantly illustrates the poignant struggle of his return. Onoda came back to this neon-lit, ultra-modern Japan as a national hero, but he felt entirely alienated by a culture he just didn't recognize anymore. Plus, he was deeply grieving the innocent local lives he had taken on the island. He really couldn't adjust, so he actually relocated to Brazil the very next year. Yet he did make a truly honorable attempt to make amends. He went back to Lubang in 1996, donated $10,000 for local scholarships, and eventually passed away in Tokyo in 2014 at the age of 91. Hiro Onodata's story absolutely forces us to question the extreme limits of loyalty, of indoctrination, and just the sheer power of the human mind. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. Did he win his personal war only to lose to time? Something to really think about.